Have you ever stared at your honeyberry bush in early summer, wondering why you only got a tiny handful of tart berries after waiting an entire year? It is incredibly frustrating to put in the physical effort, buy the expensive plants, and watch them grow, only to get a harvest so incredibly small that even the local birds feel sorry for you. Today we are talking about honeyberries, also known as haskaps, and I'm going to share the absolute game-changing secret to explosive yields in your home orchard. Here is a provocative thought for you to consider. Almost everything you have been told about treating them like other standard berry bushes is completely wrong. Your hard work and constant digging might actually be ruining your harvest right now. I promise you that by the end of this video, you will know exactly how to triple your fruit output while doing less than half the physical work you are doing currently. You will never want to pick up a shovel around these plants ever again. Let me know in the comments if you have ever accidentally killed a fruit bush by trying to care for it just a little too much. Before we dive into the exact step-by-step lazy methods, we absolutely need to understand where this incredible plant comes from, because its history dictates everything about how we should treat it. The honeyberry originates from the harsh, unforgiving climates of Siberia, northern China, and northern Japan. In the wild, they survive in the freezing, shadowy understory of boreal forests. They deal with crazy temperature swings and poor, completely undisturbed soils. Think of the honeyberry as the tough, independent survivalist of the fruit world. Because of this wild background, it wakes up incredibly early in the season. It is usually the very first thing to bloom in your garden, often while there is still deep snow covering the ground. It provides the very first fresh fruit of the gardening season. Understanding this wild northern heritage is the absolute key to unlocking massive harvests on your homestead. We need to mimic its natural, undisturbed environment. This means stepping back, putting away the heavy garden tools, and letting the brilliance of nature do the heavy lifting for us. Let us start with the biggest trap that new growers completely fall into, which is the massive myth of the lonely honeyberry. You might read on a plant nursery tag that a certain variety is partially self-fertile. You might think you can just plant one single bush in the corner of your yard and be completely done with it. That is a massive, heartbreaking mistake. If you plant just one honeyberry, you are practically guaranteeing a miserable harvest of maybe a dozen sad, tiny berries. These bushes absolutely require cross-pollination from a different plant to produce a heavy, respectable yield. Think of them like people at a grand dance. They absolutely need a partner to really get things moving on the floor. You must plant at least 2 different varieties of honeyberries. However, they cannot just be any 2 random bushes you find on sale. They absolutely need to have overlapping bloom times. If one bush blooms early in the spring and the other blooms 3 weeks later, the bees cannot transfer the pollen between them. Your harvest will completely fail. Always buy them in pairs that are genetically different but bloom in the exact same week. This single, lazy gardening trick of just putting the right companions together will do far more for your yield than any expensive fertilizer ever could. Now that we know we need compatible partners, let us talk about the lazy spacing rule for your orchard. A very common mistake is planting these bushes way too far apart from each other. People assume they need to give them massive amounts of space, treating them like a giant apple tree or a sprawling cherry tree. But remember, the whole point of our smart gardening strategy is to make pollination completely effortless for our local bees. Early in the spring, when honeyberries are actively blooming, the weather is often cold, damp, windy, and miserable. Bees are incredibly lazy when it is freezing outside. They absolutely do not want to fly 50 feet across your open yard to find the next flowering bush. If you plant your bushes about 4 to 5 feet apart, you create a dense, warm, inviting microclimate. The bees can simply hop easily from one bush to the exact next bush without burning extra precious energy. This close proximity guarantees that almost every single flower gets heavily pollinated. That perfect pollination translates directly into heavy buckets of fruit. You are basically building a highly efficient, compact fruit factory that requires absolutely zero extra work from you once it is safely in the ground. Let us completely tackle the soil acidity myth, because this specific misunderstanding causes so much unnecessary stress and back-breaking labor for home gardeners. Many people completely confuse honeyberries with blueberries. They falsely assume these bushes need highly acidic soil to simply survive. They spend hours digging in expensive peat moss, applying harsh sulfur, and constantly testing the dirt with complicated kits. Stop doing this immediately. Honeyberries are absolutely not blueberries. They are incredibly adaptable plants and actually prefer a standard neutral soil acidity, right around 6.5 to 7 on the scale. This means they will absolutely thrive in almost any standard, decent garden soil without you having to constantly amend it or worry about it. This is the ultimate lazy gardener's dream scenario. You absolutely do not need to fight your native soil conditions. Instead of fighting nature and wasting your money, you just dig a simple hole, put the plant in, and let it do its wild thing. By completely ignoring the bad advice to acidify your soil, you save yourself money, precious time, and the physical strain of mixing heavy bags of soil amendments. The bushes will thank you by growing vigorous, completely healthy root systems naturally. Here is a highly controversial statement that might severely upset traditional gardeners who love a tidy plot. You must completely banish the heavy shovel and the sharp hoe from the area around your honeyberries. Traditional gardening constantly tells us to aggressively cultivate the soil, turn it over, and keep it perfectly bare and fluffy looking. Doing that to a delicate honeyberry is basically a slow death sentence for your future harvest. These robust bushes actually have incredibly shallow, highly delicate root systems. These tiny roots spread out horizontally just millimeters below the surface of the topsoil. When you dig deeply or forcefully pull stubborn weeds around the base of the plant, you are literally ripping apart the plant's ability to drink water and absorb vital nutrients. Imagine someone constantly damaging the concrete foundation of your home. That is exactly what you are doing to your berry bush. By firmly adopting a strict zero-digging policy, you allow these microscopic, fragile feeder roots to build a massive, completely undisturbed underground network. This undisturbed root network is exactly what pulls up the massive amounts of energy required to swell those beautiful blue fruits to maximum size in the early summer. Since we are absolutely not digging or pulling weeds by hand, you might be wondering how we handle the invasive grass and aggressive weeds that desperately want to steal nutrients from our fruit bushes. The answer is the most powerful, brilliant tool in the lazy gardener's entire arsenal: smart, heavy mulching. We desperately want to recreate the soft, spongy, undisturbed forest floor where these ancient plants originally evolved. To do this perfectly, you need to apply a thick layer of organic mulch that is at least 4 to 6 inches deep, completely covering the ground all around the drip line of the bush. Aged wood chips, shredded autumn leaves, or clean farm straw are absolutely perfect materials for this job. This thick, heavy blanket completely blocks out the sunlight, stopping aggressive weed seeds from ever germinating in the first place. This completely eliminates the need for you to do any back-breaking weeding ever again. But far more importantly, as this thick layer of organic mulch slowly breaks down over the seasons, it acts as a perfect, slow-release natural fertilizer. It feeds the beneficial soil biology, which, in turn, perfectly feeds your bushes, creating a beautiful, self-sustaining cycle of nutrition that requires zero effort from you. Let us seriously talk about the critical timing of watering your plants, because this is exactly where many well-meaning people accidentally ruin the complex flavor and physical size of their harvest. Honeyberries do most of their crucial fruit development very rapidly in late spring and early summer. During this incredibly specific, short window, from the exact moment the flower petals drop to the moment the green berries start turning powdery blue, the plant desperately needs consistent, deep ground moisture. If the soil completely dries out during this crucial period, the plant absolutely panics. It will prematurely abort the fruit and drop it to the ground, or the remaining berries will remain tiny, hard, and incredibly bitter to the taste. However, the lazy approach absolutely does not mean standing out there with a heavy garden hose every single day of the week. Instead, just check the soil hidden under your thick mulch layer. If it feels dry about 2 inches down, give the base of the plant a deep, very long soak. The thick mulch will completely trap that precious moisture. This means you might only need to water deeply once every week or two, even during very dry spells. This smart watering strategy ensures massive, incredibly juicy berries without chaining you to the garden hose. There is a massive, dangerous misconception about feeding honeyberries that leads to what I like to call toxic overcare. Because we desperately want big yields, the natural human instinct is to dump heavy, expensive, synthetic, high-nitrogen fertilizers all over the bushes in early spring. This is a spectacular, guaranteed way to completely ruin your summer harvest. If you give a honeyberry way too much artificial nitrogen, it gets terribly confused. It will put all of its precious energy into growing massive, incredibly long green branches and huge floppy leaves. It will completely forget about producing vital flowers and sweet fruit. You will end up having the biggest, greenest bush in the entire neighborhood, but you will have absolutely no berries to eat. Furthermore, these heavy synthetic chemical fertilizers can easily burn those highly sensitive, extremely shallow root systems we talked about earlier. The smart, low-effort approach is to completely step away from the brightly colored chemical bags. If you have faithfully applied a good, thick layer of organic mulch like we discussed, the plant is already getting most of what it needs naturally. A gentle, patient approach is always better than aggressively shocking the plant with artificial energy spikes. So, how do we actually go about feeding them for maximum fruit production without accidentally overdoing it and ruining everything? The real secret is a very slow, completely organic approach applied at the absolute perfect time of the year. The absolute best time to feed a honeyberry is actually right after you completely harvest all the fruit, usually in the middle of summer. I know this sounds completely backwards to traditional gardening logic, but here is the brilliant reason why. After the plant successfully gives you all those delicious berries, it is completely exhausted. It desperately needs gentle, soothing nutrition to rebuild its internal energy reserves and start forming the tiny flower buds for the following year. A very light top dressing of rich, well-rotted garden compost or a gentle organic granular fertilizer formulated specially for berries is all you will ever need. You simply sprinkle it right on top of your wood chip mulch and just let the natural rain wash it down into the soil. This incredibly lazy feeding method takes exactly 3 minutes per bush just one time a year. By feeding them right after the harvest, you are brilliantly investing in next year's massive crop. Let us thoroughly discuss the absolute terror that is early spring frosts and unexpected snowstorms. Because honeyberries naturally bloom so incredibly early, sometimes as early as March or early April, novice growers absolutely panic when the local weather forecast predicts a late snowstorm or a hard overnight freeze. They run out into the dark with heavy blankets, plastic tarps, and old sheets, frantically trying to wrap the bushes like they are fragile, highly expensive tropical houseplants. Let me save you from this completely unnecessary, stressful nighttime panic right now. The delicate-looking flowers of a honeyberry are actually genetically designed by nature to withstand absolute freezing, brutal temperatures. They can routinely survive temperatures dropping way down to almost 15 or 20 degrees Fahrenheit without taking any permanent damage whatsoever. The heavy frost simply does not bother them at all. In fact, forcefully covering them with heavy tarps can sometimes cause far more damage by snapping the delicate, brittle branches or trapping way too much freezing moisture against the blooms. The smart, lazy gardener just looks out the window at a spring snowstorm covering their blooming haskaps, smiles warmly, stays inside drinking hot coffee, and knows the plant is fine. Now, we absolutely have to talk about pruning the bushes, which is easily the most misunderstood, incorrectly performed part of growing any type of fruit bush. The absolute biggest, most damaging mistake you can possibly make with a newly planted honeyberry is touching it with sharp pruning shears during its first 4 to 5 years of life in your dirt. Many overly eager people think they need to prune and shape the bush immediately to make it look tidy and professional. Absolutely do not do this under any circumstances. During these critical early years, every single green leaf is a vital solar panel that the young plant desperately needs to build a massive, robust root system underground. If you aggressively cut those leafy branches off, you are literally starving the struggling plant and severely delaying your future harvests by several years. The ultimate, absolute lazy gardening technique for young berry bushes is simply calculated neglect. Let them grow completely wild. Let them get a little messy looking, and just watch them establish themselves naturally. Your only real job during the first half-decade of the plant's life is to make sure it has enough water and a good layer of mulch. Once your healthy bush finally hits that magical 5 or 6 year mark, it will probably start to look like a very dense, heavily tangled, messy thicket. This is the exact moment when the smart gardener finally steps in with the clean pruning shears. However, we still want to do the absolute minimum amount of physical work for the absolute maximum fruiting result. The main goal of pruning a mature, thick honeyberry is absolutely not to make it look like a perfectly round, artificial decorative ball. The one and only goal is maximizing sunlight penetration. The growing berries desperately need direct sunlight to ripen properly and develop their complex, sweet sugars. If the very center of the bush is a dark, tangled, shadowy mess of old wood, the inner berries will forever remain extremely sour and incredibly tiny. In late winter, long before the sleeping plant wakes up, simply look for the oldest, thickest, grayest branches right down at the very base. You simply cut out 2 or 3 of these massive, old branches completely down to the ground. This instantly opens up the tight center of the plant, allowing warm sunlight and fresh air to flow through freely. This takes exactly 5 minutes. Another incredibly crucial aspect of this mature 5-minute pruning strategy is properly dealing with the incredibly annoying low-hanging fruit. Because honeyberries naturally have a beautiful, weeping, arching growth habit, the heavily loaded lower branches will very often droop down and touch the bare ground, especially when they are totally loaded with heavy, wet fruit. These ground-touching branches are an absolute nightmare for the lazy gardener. They practically invite ground pests to eat your fruit. They get completely covered in dirty mud every time it rains hard, and the berries usually rot completely before you can ever manage to pick them. While you already have your pruners out doing that quick winter thinning, simply snip off the very tips of any long branches that are dragging directly on the soil. We want to essentially lift the skirt of the bush, keeping all the valuable fruit at least 1 solid foot off the wet ground. This incredibly simple, effortless adjustment keeps your entire harvest perfectly clean, makes picking 1,000 times easier on your back, and totally prevents nasty fungal diseases from splashing up from the muddy soil onto the lower leaves. Let us quickly pivot to the absolute most frustrating, relentless thief in the entire garden: the local bird population. You can literally do everything perfectly right. You can have perfect living soil, perfect bee pollination, and thousands of swelling green berries. Then, you can easily wake up one bright morning to find your prized bush completely stripped bare of every single fruit. Birds absolutely love sweet honeyberries, and they are incredibly smart creatures. The massive problem is that birds always seem to figure out the berries are perfectly ripe a few days before you do. If you think you can just lazily scare them away with cheap, shiny tape, old CDs, or plastic decoy owls, you are going to be severely, bitterly disappointed. The only absolutely foolproof, totally guaranteed method to secure your precious harvest is strict physical exclusion. This means using high-quality bird netting. However, the genuinely lazy gardener absolutely does not wrestle with cheap, endlessly tangled nets every single day. The smart, permanent approach is to build a very simple, lightweight frame over the bushes using cheap plastic PVC pipes or tall bamboo stakes. The specific reason we absolutely must use a structured frame instead of just throwing the loose net directly on top of the delicate bush is all about protecting the soft fruit and preserving your own sanity. If you lazily lay the net right on the green branches, the clever birds will simply land heavily on the net, push it down with their weight, and happily eat the ripe berries right through the little holes. Furthermore, when it is finally time for you to harvest, carefully peeling a heavily tangled net off a delicate, sticky bush will violently rip off half the fruit and snap dozens of small branches. It is incredibly frustrating and ruins the fun. By easily elevating the tight net on a simple frame, you create an impenetrable, perfect force field. The frustrated birds cannot reach the fruit at all. When you are totally ready to pick, you just easily lift one loose side of the net, exactly like opening a simple tent door. It takes maybe 30 minutes to set up this easy frame once in the early spring, but it entirely guarantees that you actually get to eat 100% of the massive harvest. Now we finally arrive at the absolute most common reason why so many people mistakenly think they hate the taste of fresh honeyberries. They simply pick them at the completely wrong, incredibly premature time. Here is the incredibly sneaky trick that nature plays on eager gardeners. A honeyberry will turn a beautiful, deep, powdery blue color on the absolute outside weeks before it is actually fully ripe and sweet on the inside. Impatient, hungry gardeners see that beautiful blue color, immediately pluck the firm berry, pop it straight into their mouth, and violently spit it out because it tastes exactly like sour, unsweetened lemon juice. They then wrongly assume the entire plant is terrible. Do not ever fall for this visual trap. The ultimate secret to harvesting incredibly sweet, complex-tasting haskaps is employing brutal, unwavering patience. When the berries completely turn blue, you must firmly walk away and do absolutely nothing for at least another 10 to 14 solid days. This agonizing waiting period is exactly when the plant pumps the final massive loads of sugar directly into the fruit. The smart gardener knows patience creates perfection. So how do you actually, truly know when they are perfectly ripe without constantly tasting terribly sour berries and ruining your morning? There is a completely foolproof physical test that requires absolutely zero guesswork on your part. First, gently squeeze a single blue berry between your fingers. It should feel incredibly soft and yield slightly to the gentle pressure, feeling almost exactly like a tiny, fragile water balloon, rather than feeling totally firm and hard like a glass marble. Second, and absolutely most importantly, look at the hidden inside. Pick one soft berry and bite it right in half. If the fleshy inside is still a pale green color, it is absolutely not ready to eat. You desperately want the flesh inside to be a deep, rich crimson or dark purple, perfectly matching the dark outside skin. When the inside is fully, deeply colored, the natural sugar content has finally peaked. Finally, the ultimate physical test is exactly how easily it naturally detaches from the stem. A perfectly ripe, sweet honeyberry will practically fall off the stem heavily into your open hand if you just lightly brush against it. Wait for this exact moment. When the perfect time finally comes to secure your harvest, picking thousands of small, delicate berries one by hand is the exact opposite of lazy gardening. It takes agonizing hours. Your lower back will ache terribly, and you will eventually just give up out of sheer boredom, leaving half the valuable crop rotting on the bush. The smart, highly efficient homesteader strictly uses the drop harvest method. Because we patiently waited until the berries were perfectly, effortlessly ripe, they will detach and fall off with the absolute slightest vibration. Take a very clean plastic tarp, a large old bed sheet, or even a clean plastic kiddie pool, and slide it carefully right underneath the bushy canopy, resting it squarely on top of your wood chip mulch. Then, simply grab the thick main branches with your hands and give them a very gentle, incredibly rapid shake. Do not violently thrash the plant, just gently vibrate the branches. It will literally rain sweet blue fruit. Hundreds of perfectly ripe berries will detach instantly and fall totally safely onto your soft tarp. You can collect an entire massive harvest in about 60 seconds per bush. Once you have thoroughly shaken the entire bush, you simply gather the four corners of your plastic tarp and easily funnel all the loose berries directly into a large, clean bucket. You will immediately notice that along with the beautiful berries, you probably shook loose some small dried leaves, tiny broken twigs, and maybe a few confused garden bugs. Absolutely do not waste your precious time picking these tiny pieces of debris out one by hand. The incredibly lazy, highly effective way to clean your entire harvest is to simply use the power of the wind. Set up a gentle electric fan on a patio table outside, or just wait for a naturally breezy afternoon. Pour the mixed berries very slowly from one high bucket completely into another clean bucket positioned slightly below it, right directly in the path of the moving breeze. The heavy, completely juicy berries will naturally drop straight down safely into the bottom bucket. Meanwhile, the much lighter dried leaves, brittle stems, and tiny bugs will simply blow away completely in the gentle wind. This simple winnowing technique cleans your entire harvest perfectly in under 5 minutes. Let us definitely touch very briefly on exactly what to do if you have recently moved into a brand new property and luckily inherited old, massive, completely neglected honeyberry bushes that produce terrible, tiny yields. Many overwhelmed people think they need to aggressively rip them out by the roots with a truck and start completely over. That is way too much unnecessary physical work. Honeyberries are incredibly, surprisingly resilient plants and respond wonderfully well to a very drastic, lazy rejuvenation technique. In the absolute dead, freezing middle of winter, you can confidently take a pair of heavy, sharp loppers and mercilessly cut the entire massive bush down to about exactly 6 inches above the frozen ground. I totally know this sounds completely terrifying, but I promise you are absolutely not killing the plant. You are violently waking up the massive, highly established root system hiding underground. The very next spring, the seemingly dead stump will completely explode with vigorous, incredibly healthy new green growth. You will lose the harvest for one single year, but you completely skipped 5 years of agonizing waiting. Ultimately, the absolute biggest secret to securing a massive, enviable honeyberry harvest is completely changing your mental approach from being a highly active, stressed manager to a relaxed, observant facilitator. These incredibly robust, wild northern plants simply do not want to be constantly fussed over, endlessly chemically fertilized, or aggressively pruned every single weekend. They desperately want you to simply set up the perfect conditions on exactly day one, providing a highly compatible blooming partner for perfect pollination, ensuring a thick, heavy blanket of organic mulch to protect their shallow roots, and giving them very consistent moisture only during the rapid fruit swell. Once you intelligently establish this lazy, highly smart system, your only real, actual job is to effectively protect the ripening fruit from the hungry birds and aggressively practice patience until the berries are truly, perfectly ripe. By smartly stepping back and letting the plant's incredible wild genetics do all the heavy lifting, you save incredible amounts of time and energy, and you are heavily rewarded with overflowing buckets of the absolute best fruit. Who would have ever thought that the absolute biggest, most effective secret to completely tripling your summer harvest was actually putting the heavy shovel down and purposefully doing far less physical work? The massive turning point for any serious gardener is finally realizing that incredibly tough plants like the northern honeyberry absolutely thrive on a strict policy of benign neglect, just as long as their very basic, primal needs for cross-pollination and shallow root protection are totally met right from the start. By completely ignoring the terrible advice to treat them exactly like fussy blueberries, by strongly resisting the constant urge to prune them way too early in their life, and by brilliantly utilizing the 60-second drop harvest method, you are literally saving yourself years of completely wasted effort and bitter frustration. You are now fully equipped with the smartest, absolute laziest strategies to permanently turn those tiny, tart, disappointing yields into massive, overflowing buckets of incredibly sweet, giant berries every single spring. Thank you so much for hanging out, watching, and learning these secrets with me today. If this video completely changed the way you look at managing your fruit bushes, please take a second to hit that subscribe button, leave a huge like, and definitely share this with your homesteading friends who work way too hard in their dirt. I would absolutely love to hear from you. What is the absolute biggest, most frustrating mistake you have ever made with planting fruit bushes in your home garden? Let me know all the details in the comments below, and I will definitely see you in the next video.